Mobutu Sese Seko, the man who ate a nation, 1930 to 1997, Zaire, modern-day Democratic Republic of Congo. If you want to understand what total corruption looks like, start with Mobutu Sese Seko. He didn't just steal from his country, he became his country, and then he drained it dry. Mobutu was a military journalist who seized power in a Western-backed coup in 1965. The Cold War was at its peak, and Western nations needed allies in Africa. Mobutu positioned himself as the West's man in Central Africa, a strong man who would keep Soviet influence out of one of the most resource-rich nations on Earth. In return, the United States and Belgium looked the other way while Mobutu transformed the Congo into his personal property. He renamed the country Zaire. He renamed himself Mobutu Sese Seko Nkuku Nbendu Waza Banga, which translates roughly to the all-powerful warrior who, because of his endurance and inflexible will to win, goes from conquest to conquest, leaving fire in his wake. That name tells you everything you need to know about this man. Mobutu is estimated to have stolen between $4 and $5 billion from Zaire during his 32-year rule. To put that in perspective, that was roughly equal to the country's entire national debt. He owned properties across Europe, including a villa on the French Riviera, a palace in Switzerland, a castle in Spain, and luxury apartments in Paris and Brussels. He chartered Concorde jets for personal shopping trips to Paris. His wife, Bobi Ladawa, was known to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in a single shopping trip to European fashion houses. Meanwhile, his people went hungry. Zaire sat on some of the richest mineral deposits on Earth, including cobalt, copper, diamonds, and gold. Mobutu nationalized the mining industry and funneled the profits directly into his personal accounts. He created a system called Article 15, an unofficial rule that essentially told government employees to steal because the state wouldn't pay them. The entire country ran on corruption from top to bottom because the man at the top made it the only way to survive. He built a palace complex in his home village of Guadalete in the middle of the jungle. It included a runway long enough to land the Concorde, marble floors imported from Italy, and a massive Chinese pagoda-style building. This complex was surrounded by some of the poorest communities in the world. Infrastructure collapsed under his rule. Roads built during the colonial era fell apart and were never repaired. Hospitals ran without medicine. Schools operated without books or teachers. The entire state apparatus existed solely to enrich one man and his inner circle. Mobutu reportedly told his ministers, "If you want to steal, steal a little in a nice way. But if you steal too much to become rich overnight, you will be caught." A Western diplomat once said of Mobutu, "He's a walking bank vault with a leopard skin hat." And despite stealing billions, Mobutu was genuinely charming. Western leaders, including multiple American presidents, received him warmly. George H.W. Bush called him one of our most valued friends. He was invited to the White House, Buckingham Palace, and the Élysée Palace while his people had no clean water. He always wore his signature leopard skin hat, which became his trademark. He banned Western clothing in Zaire as part of his authenticity campaign, forcing citizens to wear traditional African attire. Yet he himself wore custom-made Western suits from European tailors on his private trips abroad. He was also terrified of flying over water and would take absurdly long overland routes to avoid short sea crossings. When rebel forces advanced on the capital in the late 1990s, Mobutu, weakened by prostate cancer, fled the country. He passed away in exile in Rabat, Morocco on September 7, 1997, at age 66. He was still wealthy. The nation he left behind was one of the poorest on Earth. Most of his stolen fortune was never recovered. And here's the final detail that tells you everything. The infrastructure he neglected was so destroyed that the rebel army that overthrew him had difficulty advancing because there were no roads left to drive on. He had literally let his country's roads return to jungle. Mobutu stole billions over decades. Our next politician managed to steal even more. Suharto, the Smiling General, 1921 to 2008, Indonesia. According to Transparency International, Suharto of Indonesia holds the record for the most money ever embezzled by a head of state. The estimated figure is between $15 and $35 billion. That is not a typo. $35 billion.
He managed this while maintaining the image of a humble, soft-spoken Javanese grandfather. They called him the Smiling General. Behind that smile was one of the most sophisticated theft operations in political history. Suharto rose to power in the mid-1960s during one of the most violent political transitions of the 20th century. Following an alleged communist coup attempt, Suharto took control of the military and oversaw a campaign against suspected communists that resulted in the loss of an estimated 500,000 to over 1 million lives across Indonesia. He formally became president in 1968 and would hold the position for 31 years. Suharto didn't steal money the way most corrupt leaders do. He didn't simply raid the treasury. He built a system so sophisticated that the corruption was woven into the legal fabric of the nation. His 6 children, known as the Suharto Six, were given monopolies over entire industries. One son controlled the national car industry. Another controlled toll roads. A daughter controlled highway construction. Every major business deal in Indonesia required a Suharto family member as a partner, with the family taking a cut of everything. The family controlled an estimated 36,000 square kilometers of real estate. That is an area larger than the entire nation of Belgium. His foundations, supposedly charitable organizations, collected mandatory contributions from businesses across Indonesia. These foundations controlled billions of dollars with virtually no oversight. The money was supposed to fund social programs. It funded the family. Foreign companies wanting to invest in Indonesia had to partner with Suharto-connected businesses, paying what were essentially fees disguised as partnership arrangements. The system was so normalized that international banks and corporations participated willingly for decades. Suharto once said in an interview, "I have not enriched myself. Everything belongs to the state." An Indonesian economist responded, "Yes, and the state belongs to him." A World Bank official privately noted, "Indonesia doesn't have corruption. Indonesia is corruption." Here's what made Suharto different from most corrupt leaders. He lived modestly. He didn't build extravagant palaces or charter luxury jets. He wore simple military uniforms and lived in a relatively modest presidential residence. The corruption was almost invisible because it was structural rather than flashy. He was a deeply superstitious man who consulted Javanese mystics and spiritual advisors before making major political decisions. He believed in the concept of wahyu, a divine light that Javanese tradition says rests upon the rightful ruler. He was also a keen farmer and gardener. He genuinely enjoyed tending to rice paddies and would often be photographed in farming clothes, projecting the image of a simple man of the people. The 1997 Asian financial crisis destroyed Indonesia's economy and exposed the depth of Suharto's corruption. Massive protests erupted across the country. On May 21, 1998, after 31 years in power, Suharto resigned. He was never convicted. Multiple legal proceedings were initiated, but Suharto's lawyers argued he was too ill to stand trial. He passed away on January 27, 2008, at age 86, in a Jakarta hospital. The vast majority of the stolen wealth was never recovered. Despite the staggering scale of his theft, many older Indonesians remember the Suharto era nostalgically as a time of stability and economic growth. The growth was real. Indonesia did develop rapidly under his rule, but the growth enriched his family first, the nation second. Suharto stole through systems. Our next politicians stole through sheer audacity.
Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos, the conjugal dictatorship. Ferdinand 1917 to 1989, Imelda born 1929, Philippines. Some corrupt politicians try to hide their theft. Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos put theirs on display. Their combined greed became so famous that it redefined what political corruption looked like to the entire world. And it all came down to shoes. Ferdinand Marcos was elected president of the Philippines in 1965 on a platform of reform and national development. He was charismatic, intelligent, and politically skilled. His wife Imelda, a former beauty queen, became his greatest political asset with her glamour and public charm. In 1972, Marcos declared martial law, claiming an insurgency threatened the nation. He would rule by decree for the next 14 years. The Marcos family is estimated to have stolen between $5 and $10 billion from the Philippines during their 21-year reign. The methods were breathtaking in their brazenness. Imelda Marcos became infamous for her spending. When the family was finally overthrown in 1986 and citizens entered the presidential palace, they discovered over 2,700 pairs of shoes in Imelda's closet. This single detail became the global symbol of their corruption. But the shoes were just the beginning. They also found 508 ball gowns, 888 handbags, 71 pairs of sunglasses, and a bulletproof undergarment. Beyond the personal extravagance, the structural theft was staggering. Marcos created shell companies and secret bank accounts in Switzerland, the United States, and across the Caribbean. He diverted international aid money meant for disaster relief into personal accounts. He took commissions on every major government contract. Imelda commissioned massive construction projects designed primarily to launder money and project prestige. The Manila Film Center was built in a frantic 77-day construction period. When scaffolding collapsed and workers fell into wet cement, construction allegedly continued without recovering the workers because Imelda insisted on meeting the deadline. This account comes from multiple workers' testimonies, though the Marcos family disputes it. She also built the Cultural Center of the Philippines, the Philippine Heart Center, and multiple luxury hotels, all while millions of Filipinos lived in extreme poverty. Imelda Marcos famously said, "I did not have 3,000 pairs of shoes, I had 1,060. She also said, "Win or lose, we go shopping after the election." And perhaps most revealingly, "I get so tired listening to $1 million here, $1 million there. It's so petty." Ferdinand reportedly told an aide, "It's the people's money, but I decide what is good for the people." Ferdinand Marcos claims to be the most decorated war hero in Philippine history, displaying dozens of medals from World War II. After his fall, investigations revealed that most of his war medals were fabricated or self-awarded. The U.S. Army found no evidence supporting most of his claimed combat actions. Imelda once attempted to purchase the entire crown jewels collection of a European royal family. The deal fell through not because of the price, but because of export restrictions. Despite the massive theft, Imelda was genuinely popular among many poor Filipinos during the Marcos era. She would visit impoverished communities and hand out cash directly. The amounts were tiny compared to what the family was taking, but the personal touch created genuine loyalty. The removal of opposition leader Benigno Aquino Jr. in 1983 triggered massive protests. The People Power Revolution of February 1986, a peaceful mass uprising, forced the Marcos family to flee the Philippines by helicopter, eventually being flown to Hawaii by the U.S. military. Ferdinand Marcos passed away in exile in Honolulu on September 28, 1989, at age 72. Imelda returned to the Philippines in 1991 and was elected to Congress multiple times. She was convicted of corruption charges but remained free on appeal. The family returned to political prominence, with Ferdinand Marcos Jr. becoming president of the Philippines in 2022. Most of the stolen Marcos wealth has never been recovered. The Philippine government has spent decades pursuing it through courts worldwide, recovering only a fraction. Meanwhile, the family's political dynasty continues to this day. The Marcos family displayed their corruption openly. Our next politician hid his behind liberation rhetoric.
Robert Mugabe, the liberator who consumed his own revolution. 1924-2019, Zimbabwe. Robert Mugabe's story might be the most tragic on this list. He began as a genuine liberation hero who helped end white minority rule in Rhodesia and create the independent nation of Zimbabwe. He ended as a corrupt leader who devastated the very nation he liberated. Mugabe was an educated teacher with 7 university degrees who became a leader of Zimbabwe's independence movement. He spent 11 years in political detention under the white Rhodesian government. When Zimbabwe gained independence in 1980, Mugabe became the country's first black prime minister and later president. The world celebrated him. He received honorary degrees from universities worldwide. He was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II. Mugabe's corruption escalated gradually over his 37-year rule. In the early years, he was relatively restrained, but as his grip on power tightened, the theft became extraordinary. His wife, Grace Mugabe, nicknamed Gucci Grace by the Zimbabwe press, became infamous for shopping sprees that rivaled Imelda Marcos. She reportedly spent $120,000 in a single shopping trip to Paris, while Zimbabwe's economy collapsed. She seized farms from their owners to create a personal dairy empire. She built a massive mansion nicknamed Blue Roof that cost millions while ordinary Zimbabweans queued for bread. Mugabe himself lived in a compound that cost an estimated $23 million to build and maintain, paid for by the state. He traveled with enormous entourages on international trips, booking entire floors of luxury hotels. But the most devastating corruption was his land reform program. Beginning in 2000, Mugabe seized white-owned commercial farms and redistributed them. While the concept of land reform had legitimate historical justification given colonial land theft, the execution was catastrophic. Many farms were given not to landless poor people, but to Mugabe's political allies, military commanders, and family members who had no farming experience. The result was the collapse of Zimbabwe's agricultural sector. A country that had been called the breadbasket of Africa became dependent on food imports. Inflation spiraled to an almost incomprehensible 79.6 billion% in November 2008. The Zimbabwe dollar became so worthless that the country abandoned its own currency entirely. Mugabe said in a speech, "We are not hungry. Why foist this food on us? We don't want to be choked. We have enough." He said this while millions of Zimbabweans were facing food shortages. He also once told the BBC, "I have died many times. I have actually beaten Jesus Christ because he only died once." Mugabe was genuinely brilliant academically. He earned multiple degrees, including a law degree while imprisoned, studying by correspondence. He spoke 5 languages fluently. He was reportedly intimidated by his wife Grace, according to multiple former aides. She wielded enormous influence over political appointments and was widely believed to be positioning herself to succeed him as president. In November 2017, at age 93, Mugabe was finally removed from power by his own military. The real trigger was not his corruption, but his attempt to position Grace as his successor, threatening the military's own power. He passed away on September 6, 2019, in a hospital in Singapore at age 95. He spent his final years in comfort while Zimbabwe continued to struggle with the economic devastation his policies had caused. The man who fought to liberate his people from colonial oppression ended up impoverishing them more severely than colonialism ever had. Zimbabwe's economy has never fully recovered. Mugabe devastated a nation's economy. Our next politician forced his people to suffer while building one of the largest structures on Earth.
Nicolae Ceausescu, the genius of the Carpathians. 1918-1989, Romania. Nicolae Ceausescu ruled Romania for 24 years, and in that time turned the country into his personal domain, while forcing his people to live in conditions that shocked even other communist nations. He called himself the genius of the Carpathians. His people called him something very different behind closed doors. Ceausescu joined the Romanian Communist Party as a teenager and rose through the ranks. He became General Secretary of the party in 1965 and gradually consolidated total control over the country. Initially, Western nations viewed him favorably because he was the only Eastern Bloc leader who publicly criticized the Soviet Union's intervention in Czechoslovakia in 1968. He received state visits from Richard Nixon, Queen Elizabeth II, and multiple Western leaders who saw him as a useful counterbalance against Moscow.
While most communist leaders lived well but not extravagantly by Western standards, Ceausescu took personal luxury to an extreme level while his population suffered. He built the Palace of the Parliament in Bucharest. It is the heaviest building in the world and the second largest administrative building on Earth after the Pentagon. The construction required demolishing 1/5 of Bucharest's historic center, destroying churches, synagogues, hospitals, and an estimated 40,000 homes. Over 20,000 workers labored on the project around the clock. To fund the palace and pay off Romania's foreign debt, Ceausescu exported nearly all of Romania's food and energy production. His people endured severe rationing. Heat was limited to 14 degrees Celsius in winter. Hot water was available only on certain days. Light bulbs were restricted to 40 watts per room. Television broadcast only 2 hours per day, and most of that was propaganda about Ceausescu. Meanwhile, Ceausescu and Elena Ceausescu lived in luxury. They had multiple palaces and villas stocked with imported Western food and goods. Elena wore fur coats and designer clothing, while average Romanians queued for hours to buy bread and milk. He also implemented a population growth policy that banned contraception and required women to have at least 5 children. Government doctors conducted monthly examinations of women of bearing age. The policy led to thousands of unwanted children being abandoned in state-run institutions, where conditions were deeply troubling. Ceausescu declared, "The party has given us everything." Romanian citizens had a bitter joke in response. "We have nothing, and the party gave it to us." Elena Ceausescu held the position of Deputy Prime Minister despite having questionable academic credentials. She once said to a crowd, "I gave the people science." Her doctoral thesis on polymer chemistry was almost certainly ghostwritten. After the fall of the regime, scientists who reviewed her work said she could not have understood it, let alone written it. Ceausescu was terrified of germs. He had his security detail wipe down everything he might touch with alcohol. He brought his own bed sheets when traveling abroad. He employed an entire laboratory to test his food before every meal. He also kept a pet parrot that he genuinely loved, reportedly one of the few living things he showed open affection toward. On December 21, 1989, Ceausescu gave a speech from the balcony of the Central Committee building in Bucharest. For the first time in his rule, the crowd began jeering. The moment was captured on live television. The shock on his face became one of the most iconic images of the fall of communism. Within 4 days, he and Elena had fled by helicopter, been captured, and been subjected to a hasty military tribunal. They were convicted of severe charges, including the misuse of state funds on a massive scale. They were executed by firing squad on Christmas Day. The Palace of the Parliament he impoverished his nation to build now houses Romania's democratic parliament. The building meant to glorify a dictator now serves the democracy that replaced him. Ceausescu's corruption brought him down in days. Our next politician's corruption has lasted generations.
The Duvalier dynasty, Papa Doc and Baby Doc. François, 1907 to 1971, Jean-Claude, 1951 to 2014. Haiti. The Duvalier dynasty turned Haiti, already one of the poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere, into a personal operation that lasted nearly 3 decades. Father and son ruled through fear and theft in equal measure. François Duvalier was a country doctor who gained popularity through a public health campaign against tropical diseases. He was soft-spoken and intellectual, earning the nickname Papa Doc. He was elected president in 1957 with widespread popular support. Within 2 years, he had transformed Haiti into a dictatorship. Papa Doc created the Tonton Macoutes, a paramilitary force named for a Haitian Creole figure that roughly translates to Uncle Gunnysack, a bogeyman from folklore. The Macoutes operated outside any legal structure, controlling the population through intimidation and extortion. They wore dark sunglasses as their trademark and answered only to Duvalier himself. Papa Doc exploited Vodou spiritual beliefs to maintain power. He deliberately modeled his appearance on Baron Samedi, the Vodou figure associated with the boundary between life and what comes after, wearing dark glasses and speaking in a nasal whisper. Many rural Haitians genuinely believed he possessed supernatural abilities. He embezzled an estimated $500 million in international aid money meant for the Haitian people. Haiti received massive amounts of foreign aid during the Cold War because the United States saw Duvalier as a useful ally in the Caribbean. When Papa Doc passed away in 1971, he transferred the presidency to his 19-year-old son, Jean-Claude Doc, nicknamed Baby Doc. This made Jean-Claude the youngest president in the world at the time. Baby Doc took the corruption to new levels of excess. He married Michelle Bennett in a wedding that cost an estimated $3 to $5 million, while the average Haitian income was around $300 per year. The wedding cake alone was reportedly flown in from Paris. Baby Doc and Michelle lived in extraordinary luxury. They maintained a yacht, multiple luxury cars, and apartments in Paris and New York. Michelle was known for shopping trips that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Meanwhile, Haiti's economy collapsed. Malnutrition was widespread. Healthcare was virtually non-existent outside Port-au-Prince. The education system barely functioned. The Duvaliers are estimated to have taken from Haiti between $300 and $800 million over their combined 29-year rule. Papa Doc once declared, "I am the Haitian flag. Those who wish to destroy Duvalier wish to destroy Haiti." He also said, "God and the people are the source of all power. I have been given power. I have taken it, and I will keep it forever." Baby Doc, when asked about poverty in Haiti years later, said, "I didn't take any money. I don't know what they're talking about." Here's a detail that tells you everything about how Papa Doc thought. He once ordered all black dogs in the country to be rounded up because he believed a political opponent had transformed into a black dog to escape him. This was not a metaphor. He literally ordered the capture of black dogs. He also had the Lord's Prayer rewritten to begin, "Our Doc, who art in the National Palace for life, hallowed be thy name." Baby Doc was reportedly not interested in governing at all. He preferred fast cars and nightlife. The actual running of the country was handled by his mother, Simone, and later his wife, Michelle, who competed fiercely for influence. When Baby Doc fled Haiti in 1986 aboard a U.S. Air Force plane, he brought so many luxury goods and personal effects that the cargo required a separate aircraft. Papa Doc passed away of natural causes in the presidential palace on April 21, 1971, still holding power at age 64. Baby Doc lived in exile in France for 25 years. He returned to Haiti in 2011 and faced corruption charges but was never convicted. He passed away on October 4, 2014, at age 63. Haiti has never recovered from the Duvalier era. The institutions they dismantled, the money they took, and the culture of corruption they established continue to affect the nation decades later. The Duvaliers drained Haiti over decades. Our next politician did his damage with stunning speed.
Arnoldo Alemán, the thief of Nicaragua. Born 1946, Nicaragua. Most politicians on this list ruled for decades. Arnoldo Alemán managed to become one of the most corrupt leaders in Latin American history in just 5 years. Transparency International named him one of the top 10 most corrupt world leaders in recent history, placing him alongside Marcos and Suharto. Alemán was a lawyer and businessman who became mayor of Managua, Nicaragua's capital, in 1990. He used the position to build a political base and was elected president in 1997. He ran on an anti-corruption platform. The irony of that would become apparent almost immediately. During his 5-year presidency from 1997 to 2002, Alemán is estimated to have taken approximately $100 million from Nicaragua, one of the poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere. To understand how outrageous that figure is, consider that $100 million represented roughly 10% of Nicaragua's entire annual budget. He essentially took 1 out of every $10 the government collected. He diverted international aid money, manipulated government contracts, and laundered money through a complex web of shell companies in Panama, the United States, and the Caribbean. He maintained a lifestyle of private jets, designer clothing, and lavish events, while most Nicaraguans lived on less than $2 a day. When confronted with corruption allegations, Alemán said, "I entered politics poor, and I will leave politics poor." A Nicaraguan journalist responded, "He entered poor, and the country left poor." Alemán weighed over 300 pounds during his presidency, earning him the unflattering nickname El Gordo, meaning the heavy one. His physical size became a symbol of excess in a country where malnutrition was common. After leaving office, Alemán was convicted of money laundering and embezzlement and sentenced to 20 years. However, he served his sentence under house arrest at his own ranch, essentially living in comfort while technically imprisoned. He later made a political arrangement with former rival Daniel Ortega that resulted in his conviction being overturned. The agreement between the two former opponents was designed to keep them both in power and out of legal trouble. The man who ran on an anti-corruption platform became the textbook definition of political corruption in Central America. His case is studied in anti-corruption programs worldwide as an example of how quickly a democracy can be hollowed out from within. Alemán stole from one of the poorest nations in the Americas. Our next politician stole from one of the richest in Africa.
Sani Abacha, the dark-goggled dictator. 1943 to 1998, Nigeria. Sani Abacha ruled Nigeria for only 5 years. In that time, he managed to take an estimated $3 to $5 billion, making him one of the most efficient operators in the history of political corruption. He was so secretive that even his inner circle didn't know the full extent of his activities until after he was gone. Abacha was a career military officer who participated in multiple Nigerian coups. He served as defense minister before taking control in November 1993, dissolving all democratic institutions and establishing himself as head of state. He rarely appeared in public, and when he did, he always wore dark sunglasses, earning him his nickname. He spoke publicly so rarely that many Nigerians joked they wouldn't recognize his voice. Abacha's method was systematic and relentless. He operated through a network of front companies, foreign bank accounts, and trusted associates who physically carried cash out of Nigeria in suitcases and diplomatic pouches. He maintained accounts in banks across Switzerland, the United Kingdom, the United States, Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, and Jersey. After his passing, investigators found money in over 130 bank accounts across multiple countries. His approach was straightforward. He would order the Central Bank of Nigeria to issue payments for fictitious national security contracts. The money would be physically withdrawn in cash, loaded into vehicles, and driven to Abacha's personal residence, where it was sorted and distributed to foreign accounts. Former central bank officials testified that on multiple occasions, they were ordered to prepare cash withdrawals of tens of millions of dollars at a time, with no documentation beyond Abacha's verbal order. He also controlled Nigeria's oil revenues, taking percentages from every barrel sold. Nigeria was one of the world's largest oil producers, generating billions annually, and Abacha treated the oil revenue as his personal income stream. A Nigerian banker who was involved in the transfers later testified, "The money came in trucks. We counted it for days. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life." A Swiss investigator said after tracing Abacha's accounts, the scale was staggering. Every time we found one account, it led to 3 more. Abacha was extraordinarily paranoid. He rarely slept in the same room twice. He employed multiple food tasters. He trusted almost no one and communicated major decisions through only 2 or 3 intermediaries. Despite his immense wealth, he lived relatively modestly by the standards of most leaders on this list. He didn't build extravagant palaces or collect luxury vehicles. The money was simply moved abroad and deposited in bank accounts.
Some investigators believe he was accumulating it for a permanent exile that he never lived to take. On June 8, 1998, Sani Abacha was found unresponsive in his quarters at the presidential villa in Abuja. The official cause was cardiac failure. However, persistent accounts suggest he may have been given something harmful by associates who feared he was becoming too unpredictable. He was 54 years old. After his passing, the Nigerian government and international investigators spent years tracking down his assets. Approximately $4 billion has been identified in accounts worldwide, and over $2 billion has been recovered and returned to Nigeria in various installments over the past 2 decades. And here's the final detail. The money recovered from Abacha's accounts has itself become a source of controversy. Multiple Nigerian officials involved in receiving and distributing the recovered funds have been accused of misappropriating portions of the returned money. The corruption literally corrupted the process of recovering from corruption. Abacha operated through trucks full of cash. Our final politician proved that corruption doesn't require a dictatorship.
Silvio Berlusconi, the prime minister who owned everything. 1936-2023, Italy. Every other politician on this list held power through military force or single-party rule. Silvio Berlusconi is here because he demonstrated something perhaps more unsettling: that significant corruption can thrive in a fully functioning Western democracy. Berlusconi was already one of Italy's richest men before entering politics. He built a media empire that included Italy's 3 largest private television networks, a major publishing house, an advertising company, and AC Milan Football Club. In 1994, when his political allies collapsed in corruption scandals, Berlusconi entered politics directly, creating a new party called Forza Italia, literally meaning "Go Italy," like a football chant. He served as prime minister 3 times across a span of 17 years. Berlusconi faced over 20 criminal proceedings during his political career on charges including tax fraud, financial irregularities, and misuse of office. He was convicted of tax fraud in 2013. What made Berlusconi's situation unique was that he used his political position to protect his business interests and used his media empire to protect his political position. It was a self-reinforcing cycle of power and wealth. As prime minister, he supported laws that directly benefited his companies. He reduced regulations on his media holdings, adjusted tax laws to benefit his business structure, and shortened statutes of limitations on financial matters that he himself was being investigated for. Several of his cases were dismissed because the statute of limitations expired, in some instances due to laws he had helped change. He influenced an estimated 90% of Italian national television during his time in office, owning 3 channels privately and having authority over 3 state-owned channels as prime minister. Berlusconi once said, "I am the Jesus Christ of politics. I am a patient victim. I sacrifice myself for everyone." He also said, "The best political leader in the world is me. There is no one else who comes close." When asked about his legal difficulties, he responded, "I am without doubt the person who has been the most persecuted in the entire history of the world and the history of man." Berlusconi was genuinely charming and funny. Even his political opponents acknowledged his personal charisma. He would tell jokes during parliamentary sessions and once wore a bandana to a NATO summit to cover a hair transplant, turning it into a media event. He made numerous controversial public statements that would have ended any other politician's career. Each incident seemed to strengthen rather than weaken his support among his base. Berlusconi passed away on June 12, 2023, at age 86 from a form of leukemia. He was still a sitting senator and party leader at the time. He was never imprisoned despite his conviction, having served his sentence through community service at a care facility. Berlusconi proved that in a modern democracy, you don't need a military takeover to corrupt a country. You just need enough money, enough media control, and enough charisma to make corruption feel entertaining rather than threatening.
His model of combined media, political, and business power has been studied and arguably echoed by political figures worldwide.
And there you have it. 9 politicians who prove that corruption is not limited by geography, ideology, or political system. From Mobutu's leopard skin hat diplomacy to Suharto's invisible structural theft. From the Marcos shoe collection to Mugabe's transformation from liberator to the man who devastated his own revolution. Ceausescu built the heaviest building on earth while his people froze in the dark. The Duvaliers turned Haiti into a family enterprise. Alaman took 10% of everything. Abacha sent cash out in trucks, and Berlusconi showed that you can operate in broad daylight if you own the cameras. What's striking is the pattern. Nearly every one of these politicians rose to power promising to help ordinary people. Mobutu promised African authenticity. Mugabe promised liberation. Marcos promised reform. Alaman literally campaigned against corruption. And every single one of them betrayed that promise for personal enrichment. The total amount taken by the politicians in this video is estimated at over $60 billion. That's money that could have built schools, hospitals, roads, and futures for hundreds of millions of people. But perhaps the most disturbing fact is this: most of them got away with it. Many passed away wealthy, some were never convicted, and in several cases their families still hold power and wealth today. Corruption doesn't just take money, it takes possibility. It takes the futures that nations could have had. If you found this video fascinating, subscribe for more deep dives into history's most extreme figures. We cover everything from the most brutal rulers to the most mysterious disappearances in history. Hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.